I'd like to start by just introducing myself for those of you who have not met me before, and there are a lot of very familiar and welcoming faces in the room. My name is Cynthia Payne and I'm the CEO of SummitCare, and I'd like to first acknowledge a very warm welcome on behalf of Stephen Colcom and the team here, who are very excited to be hosting today's national launch. We have some formalities this afternoon as we work through the launch, and very excited to have actively participating some of our residents this afternoon who I know quite well. The national launch of the Spiritual Care Guidelines is something that I am personally enormously joyous to be part of, and particularly SummitCare, recognising our very small role in the development of the guidelines. And I'd like to just particularly make my personal acknowledgement of Elizabeth Pringle, who at the very early part of that development phase, someone that I've known for many years and been very passionate about this area. For us here at SummitCare, it is certainly an area that we recognise that needs to be an important focus, particularly for our residents' journey throughout their stay, both in our home care services as well as our residential aged care services. So I really, really welcome you to our place today, and I'm going to now hand over the formalities to Ilsa Hampton, who is the CEO. I knew that, but you know what? When I get it stuck in my head wrong, you know it's going to come out wrong. So I am human as well, so my apologies. CEO of Meaningful Ageing Australia, a relatively new and young organisation, but one that is having a very significant impact nationally and obviously through the launch of today. So with no further ado, Ilsa, please, I'll hand over.
Thank you, Cynthia, and welcome. And thank you all for joining us to mark this moment that aged care in Australia is given a wonderful gift, a pathway to holistic care for the benefit of all residents, clients, staff and families. So as we begin today, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered, the Darug people. I pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and in particular acknowledge the spiritual strength of Australia's First Peoples. So let's take a moment to settle ourselves, to release ourselves from all the pressures of the things we should have done, all the things we could be doing, maybe even the stress of getting here if you've travelled. Notice any tension that you're carrying and let it go. I find it helpful when doing these sort of grounding exercises to actually notice the floor beneath my feet. So notice that you are in contact with the ground and that you are here. Thank you. So we welcome especially, of course, the residents and staff of SummitCare. We're very grateful and so happy that you're hosting us today. Also a special welcome to Nick Ryan, CEO of the Australian Aged Care Quality Agency, Ross Lowe, the Chair of the Meaningful Ageing Australia Board, and the other board members that are here today, Brian Mason and John Ireland. You are John. Cheryl Holmes, CEO of Spiritual Health Victoria, Elsie Brahmanson from the Department of Health, Dave Petty, the former CEO of PASCOP, which became known as Meaningful Ageing Australia, Deborah O'Connor, Deputy Director from NARI, Elizabeth Pringle from Improvement Matters, and Project Manager Extraordinaire. And welcome especially to those others of you who have participated in the development of the guidelines in the many consultations, surveys, pilots, project meetings, part of the Expert Advisory Panel and Project Advisory Group. We've also received apologies from a number of people who couldn't make it today, including, as you may have noticed from a change in the program, Geraldine Duke. So Geraldine was very apologetic when she contacted me to advise that unfortunately she would not be able to join us. So thank you again to Nick Ryan, who stepped in and will be doing the honours for us today in the official launch. Apologies have also been received from the Minister for Aged Care, Susan Lee, who sends her well wishes for the launch, Odette Wanders, CEO of Palliative Care Victoria and Meaningful Ageing Australia board member, Mr John Day, the Minister for Health in Western Australia, Mr Martin Foley, the Minister for Ageing in Victoria, James Beckford-Saunders, the CEO of the Australian Association of Gerontology, Elizabeth McKinlay from Charles Sturt Uni, and Peter Oliver from the Spiritual Care Australia board. So, what's all the fuss about spiritual care? So today is census night. What box are you going to tick when it asks you about religion? Well, actually, spiritual care is exactly not that. It's not about ticking a box for religion. Why travel all over the countryside and blaze the email trails inviting people to talk about spiritual care in aged care in Australia? Why would the department invest in a project like this? Isn't it just something for religious types that should be taken care of by their own communities? So I could tell you about the growing literature base that speaks to this question, as we see a huge growth in articles in the area of spirituality from around 20 years ago to thousands today. Academics and practitioners from a wide range of fields have taken up this exploration of spirituality in health, aged care and social services. So I could talk to you about increased resilience, reduced agitation, improved staff engagement, reduced complaints and strengthened connections between family members and their loved ones. However, as time is of the essence, I'll refer you to the national guidelines, stakeholder consultation report and literature review for those kinds of details. They'll be published on our website after today. So instead, I'm going to tell you a very short true story which gives you a glimpse into the life of someone we call Maria and starts to get us into the terrain of spirituality. So Maria, let's call her Maria, she lives alone with chronic back pain. She's the kind of person who would be supported on a community aged care package. She's barely mobile. She travels very, very slowly, very short distances with a walker. She's Italian speaking with just enough English to get by. She's Catholic and has just turned 84. She loves her garden. Then there's a woman who we'll call Mavis. She's the kind of person who gets a bit of local council support, maybe a bit of cleaning help every now and then. Mavis moved into Maria's neighbourhood a couple of years ago. Mavis is 76, doesn't speak any Italian, is not Catholic, and actually as a Protestant would have been brought up to view Catholics as outside the mainstream in years gone by. And Mavis has a wide range of her own health challenges. Mavis loves to garden. Maria and Mavis developed a connection that started when Mavis walked past Maria in her front garden, and they managed to communicate with gestures and the few words that they held in common. That in itself tells you something. Okay, so there's Maria, who can barely walk, and there's Mavis, 2 doors down in a unit at the back of a property. Last year, for Christmas, Maria put a bottle of champagne and a Pandoro, the traditional Italian Christmas cake, on her walker and inched her way to Mavis's front door. Yeah? She literally inched her way to Mavis's place in order to be able to give her this gift. Italian treasures of the season. Why? Why would she embark on such a perilous journey on her own? Maria's daughter visits often. She could have waited until her daughter was there to drop them off, or waited until Mavis dropped by. The reason, of course, is that actions related to meaning, purpose and connectedness are intrinsic and compelling to being human. The champagne, the cake, the effort, the religious season, it all has huge meaning for Maria. Meaning, purpose and connectedness, the heart of spirituality. The gifts that Maria was bringing spoke volumes about her identity as Catholic, someone who believes in God, the courage and perseverance of taking the journey from her front door to Mavis's with a gift. That speaks volumes about her strong sense of purpose in what it means to be a friend and neighbour despite the multiple barriers. And connectedness. Maria was acting to maintain and strengthen the connection between herself and Mavis, and also the connection with herself, as she took these actions that reinforced her identity as able-bodied, Catholic, good neighbour and friend. Maria may well have said a prayer as she did these things. This is, of course, part of the spirituality story as well, and that's a part that I don't know out of Maria's story. So Nick is going to talk later about the context for this project in aged care, and so I won't go down that track just now. Suffice to say that being able to notice the presence of spirituality in everyday actions and responses of ourselves and those around us in this post-Christian era, it does not yet come naturally to most people in the community, including those working in aged care. Having a system that is orientated around task, checklists, compliance, and now unit costs with the advent of CDC does not equip people to be present to others as human beings, which is, of course, the gift and the challenge of the business that we are in. So I'm going to hand over now to Cheryl Holmes, the CEO of Spiritual Health Victoria, who's going to give you a bit of a background on the development of this exciting project for the development of the national guidelines for spiritual care and aged care. Thank you.
That's me. It's really exciting to be with you today for the launch of these national guidelines for spiritual care in aged care. It has been a long journey, and I'm not going to talk for very long because we've got a few people and a few formalities to get through. But recently, Ilsa asked me to write a brief history of the development of the national guidelines. And if you're really interested to know about that, that brief history is going to be on the Meaningful Ageing Australia website, or it might already be there tomorrow. It's going to be there tomorrow. So if you want to read the history, you can. As I was writing that brief history, I was reminded of the significant time, energy, and the numbers of people who have been involved since we began thinking about the need for best practice guidelines for spiritual care in aged care. I first started meeting with people in the aged care sector in 2008. And for my organisation, called Spiritual Health Victoria, it was the 2009-2012 strategic plan that first put up as one of our main priorities was to develop best practice guidelines for spiritual care in aged care. So it's been a long journey from 2008 to 2016. And what began as a Victorian project became a national project with the establishment of Meaningful Ageing Australia in 2013. I'm really proud that my organisation, Spiritual Health Victoria, was able to keep the hope of these guidelines alive over the years from 2009 to 2014, when we were able to form a partnership with Meaningful Ageing Australia and national funding was finally granted. I've been trying to remember, and I've asked a number of people the origins of a quote that's been going around in my head. And it's a quote that says something like, and if you know it, then afterwards at afternoon tea you can tell me where it's from. But it's a quote that talks about Australian spirituality being like a whisper in the mind and a quiet hope in the heart. I think what began as a whisper and a quiet hope in the heart has now become a reality that we can celebrate today and that we can begin to shout about. When we recognise the multitude ways that people find meaning, the very many ways that people express their beliefs and values, when we look at the number of ways that people feel connected, those are all expressions of spirituality. And then we begin to understand how essential spiritual care is. I want to give my thanks to Meaningful Ageing Australia for being willing to take this on in their really early days of establishment, when they were just trying to get going. It was a big commitment to take on. Ilsa, I really look forward to our continuing collaboration and work together over the years to come. And to all of you, I look forward to seeing and hearing about the implementation of these guidelines, how they've really made a difference in the lives of all of the people who are encompassed when we talk about the aged care sector. And if we had glasses in our hands, I'd say, here's to ageing that is truly meaningful.
One of the themes in the national guidelines is integration and the whole of organisation approach. So we couldn't possibly launch guidelines without including some people from aged care as well. So I'd like to invite up Stephen now, who's one of the managers here. He's going to introduce an item for us that will also include the rest of us. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Ilsa. We like to do things a bit different here at St Mary's. So we've got a group, we call it Move to the Beat. Ilsa and Cheryl both spoke about two things. They talked about the heart. They talked about the whisper of the heart, and Maria walking and that heartbeat that she had. So we've got this program, which you'll see, the beat coming through from that heart. I'll introduce her a little bit later. She's going to come up, but Sandra, she's done a short speech about what it really means to her. I guess the importance of this is, with the guidelines, how do they actually translate into the aged care and what we do. So this is a sample. I've got Claire and Anna, who are going to come up. This is only a small group. We've got 120 residents. We normally have about 60 residents in here doing this. So we've only got a small snippet. And obviously we have residents that are in our comfort chairs, in wheelchairs, those that are able-bodied as well. So it's open to everybody.
The quality of life and well-being of individuals and groups. Groups of individuals can feel the power of well-being through exercise, through prayer, through music and through laughter. During Move to the Beat, no matter the age or agility of people, all levels of residents will show movement and participate during this activity. We have a lot of laughter and fun. The latest work in progress is our reflection room to cater for those that need to have time to themselves. We have a lot of entertainment with all kinds of groups. We have so many, excuse me, I can breathe now. We have so many beautiful residents in our nursing home. They are taken care of by a very caring staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So I'm going to invite up now Nick Ryan, who's going to share some thoughts with us, and then in a little while he will also lead the official launch. So thank you, Nick.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute pleasure to be here. I'm Nick Ryan, and my job is the CEO of the Australian Aged Care Quality Agency. I'd also like to acknowledge the Durack people and their elders past and present, and also recognising that whilst we talk about religion and faith and spirituality, the bond between those people, these owners, and this land goes back tens of thousands of years. So there's much rich more yet to learn. I'd like to acknowledge today's speakers as well. Ilsa, thank you very much, and Cheryl and Sandra, thank you. Cynthia, thank you for your welcome and your hospitality, and especially to the residents, thank you for having us in your home. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge Meaningful Ageing Australia, and I'd like to acknowledge Spiritual Health Australia, the National Ageing Research Institute, the Department of Health for $450,000 for the project, and my friend and colleague Elsie Bramerson, nice to see you, Elsie. Spiritual Health Victoria, Dr. Patricia Edgar for writing the foreword. Elizabeth Pringle, congratulations on outstanding project management. Our loss has been our gain. Elizabeth worked for us for many years. I tried not to take it personally when 2 months after joining the job she left. Others may want to join the dots, but we're very grateful that whilst it's our loss in the agency, it's been our loss, it's been our gain as a sector. To the project team, the project advisory group, the expert advisory panel, and all those involved in the research, the interviews and the pilot. This is really first-class work. This is every angle that I look at it, the promise and the achievement is outstanding. I'd like to start with bringing to mind, I'm afraid I don't have a picture of the cartoon, but it's a Michael Leunig cartoon with him holding a saucepan with lots of stuff cooking inside. All right, so it's a well-known prayer of thanks for handles. And if you know Leunig, his reflections are often unusual, but they have a keen insight. So he has this prayer of thanks for handles, because handles enable us to manage highly volatile events every day with some safety. There's no way without a handle that we could cook or cook safely. And so whilst it seems really basic and an obvious achievement, in fact it keeps us safe, it nourishes us or enables us to be nourished, and this provides us with food. And so I think that the document that we're here for now, the national guidelines, are in a sense a handle. What they hold on to, or what they give us access to, is a rich and powerful brew. And I might come back to this. And in a sense, our life is one long cooking session, if I can borrow the cooking metaphor. The big questions of life, the ones that all of us have simmering away, whether we attend to the questions or not, have always been, amongst others, who am I? To whom do I belong? Where do I belong? How do I contribute and make a difference? What gives me joy and hope? How do I recover from grief and loss? What lies beyond this? And what is my story and how can I tell it? While the questions remain the same as they have for thousands of years, the ways in which we ask, let alone answer these questions, are always changing.
And the brilliance of the guidelines is they've found a way that's fresh and contemporary and provides a basis for ongoing work in the future.
Today we gather to celebrate these new spiritual care guidelines. They are not just a new handle, but they reflect a new stove, a new kitchen, new ingredients, both old and new, for a generation of new cooks and diners. Crucially, the guidelines not only draw from our recent past and present, they provide a rich basis for the future of aged care. So, ageing and aged care, as we currently know them, in many ways reflect the century of its birth, and that's last century. In the 20th century, we saw the rolling out of electricity, clean water, sewerage, the emergence of antibiotics, x-rays, the possibility of surviving a cancer diagnosis, and heart bypass, to name a few. The last decade saw in Australia, for many, a considerable rise in wealth and life expectancy. The other factor as to why people live longer is, and this will surprise you, the extent of female literacy in a society. It's not just antibiotics and fresh, clean running water, it boils down to female literacy. But that's for another time. The same period saw the emergence of the notion of a third age, a type of second adolescence, the promise of years of health and leisure and new opportunities without the burden of having to make a living, or at least a full-time living. The nuclear rather than the intergenerational family became the norm. Australians of all age, despite living physically closer together, continued to express a sense of social isolation, since they might not have any relationship with their neighbours. Even social media, whilst initially promising community, often adds to a sense of isolation. Our recent past has seen other sweeping sociological changes. Many of the old authorities are under challenge. Governments, churches, academia, aged care regulators like myself, political parties and business have all lost some of their gloss and authority. In terms of religious organisations, it's still important to note that the largest non-government providers of human services remain these organisations. So I'm not about to write organised religion off just yet. But the way that people ask and answer life's deep questions have radically changed. This has given rise to a new dynamic unheard of 50 years ago, the SBNR. SBNR, if you go to inner urban areas where they eat goat's cheese, right, they'll tell you that they're SBNRs, spiritual but not religious. And so we know that about 20% of people describe themselves that way, and about 20% say that they have no religion, but they will still continue to identify as being spiritual. And so that's already been mapped by some earlier speakers. This has coincided with the New Age, with a much closer link of body and mind connection, quantum physics. There's a whole range of new insights, and crucially, the rediscovery of mindfulness. So mindfulness is the new black or something, I think. So Australian aged care came into the midst of all these changes. The initial focus was on residential aged care providers ensuring appropriate clinical care and housing for older Australians. Aged care accreditation standards were developed as a benchmark that all providers needed to meet. Standard 3, if you're familiar with it, talks about care recipients' lifestyle and ensures that the care provided respects the dignity, independence and personal choices of residents. Even outcome 3.8, cultural and spiritual life, requires that providers identify and support each individual's interests, customs, belief and cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Whilst the vast majority of providers meet this outcome, there's always been a need for development and improvement in how we understand and support older people as they make meaning in their final years of life. The story of accreditation has been successful, no doubt. However, more is needed. So following the 2011 Productivity Commission inquiry called Caring for Older Australians, the focus rightly shifted from a provider-centred care industry to becoming a consumer-focused industry, and we're now in the midst of that transition. As you might know, the aged care standards themselves are under review, and there's a development of new draft guidelines out for comment shortly. However, the launch of these guidelines means that the insights and the comprehensive frame that have been developed here are well placed to inform the new accreditation standards. Whilst I welcome the shift to consumer-directed care, there's much more to care and indeed to life than a consumer experience. Let me tell you, I'm not first and foremost a consumer. I'm a person, and so are you. So let's turn to the guidelines, the national guidelines. I want to identify 10 key strengths that I see in the guidelines. The guidelines are based on rich experience, thorough research, an inclusive process, and crucially, if I can get technical, a positive anthropology that sees human beings as, George Vaillant would say, as being physiologically hardwired for faith, hope and love. We're not just consumers, we're hardwired for meaning. That's who we are. This view of the human person as a meaning-making being is much richer than just being a consumer, let alone a care recipient. They provide a welcoming and inclusive space for all, whether one undertakes their meaning-making in a religious tradition or in any number of other ways. The guidelines are agile in understanding the distinctions and the links between meaning-making, religious institutions, and of course new ways of expressing spirituality. They're generous and expansive in understanding that meaning-making is not just cerebral. It's artistic, it may involve nature, gesture, symbols and ritual, which is one of the reasons why I remain a fan of the Arts Health Institute, who can bring that to life. The guidelines provide ways in which mission-based care providers, aged care providers, can reinvigorate their own meaning-making as organisations and respond to and support new meaning-making for those for whom they provide care and support. They provide ways in which all aged care providers can draw upon and reflect a sense of meaning-making and support for those for whom they provide care and support. They identify what everyone, all staff, spiritual care practitioners and faith representatives involved in care can do to better be attendant to their own meaning-making as well as supporting the meaning-making of those for whom they provide care. The guidelines, in a sense, reinvigorate our old notion of vocation. So once upon a time people said, what's your vocation? Well, they did in the world that I grew up in. But we kind of gave away vocations to a notion called a career, didn't we? A career doesn't necessarily, it can tap into the deep well springs of meaning. So I think that this gives us a chance to see the work that we do, not just in terms of an occupation or a career, but it's where, as James Farrell would say, it's where the world's deep need and my deep giftedness meet. The guidelines are clear, measurable, implementable, and reviewable. They're based on great theory, but they are completely doable. And crucially, they provide a rich basis for the future of the development of all aged care in Australia. So that in closing, can I thank you for the opportunity to launch these? It's a great personal privilege to do so. Can I say that they're a great new kitchen, so let's get cooking. Can I invite Elsie and Sandra to come out? In fact, we'll come to you, Sandra. How does that sound? In fact, I'll grab 2 copies if I can. Thank you. I'll offer you that. I'll offer you that. And just say the aged care community welcomes the national guidelines as a significant benchmark for the integration of spiritual care, giving all organisations a clear pathway to embrace whole of person care. Congratulations, and let's celebrate the launch of the national guidelines.
Thank you, Nick. I'll just put in a little advertisement. Meaningful Ageing Australia would love to help you with your cooking. So get in touch with us. So we're getting towards the end of the formalities now. I just wanted to invite you into a reflective process. Again, given that we're launching national guidelines for spiritual care in aged care, we couldn't leave reflection completely aside in terms of some reflection for ourselves. So I'm not going to ask you to do anything strange, so you don't need to worry, but I do have some instructions for you and I'd love you to participate if you can. And if you can't do the movements that I'm asking, perhaps you can picture them in your mind. So I'd like you to hold out your hand. Did you know that today you hold spirituality in the palm of your hand? So just form a loose fist and sit your loose fist on your lap or your leg, somewhere comfortable. Now hold out your thumb while your fist is on your lap. Hold out your thumb. Well, this was called your thumb, but actually today we are renaming it meaning. Now add your next finger, the pointer. Today we are renaming this finger purpose. So we have meaning and purpose. Now add your middle finger. This is not a finger anymore. This is connectedness. Meaning, purpose, and connectedness. So we are all carrying spirituality around with us all the time. Now add your next finger, the one that was called your ring finger until today. This finger we are renaming celebration. So thinking about meaning, purpose and connectedness in your own life or your work, what is there to celebrate? Let's just pause for a moment and think about one thing that you can celebrate. It may be something in your sources of hope. It may be one small act you received or were able to offer that tuned into someone else's sense of meaning, purpose or connectedness. It may have been something from today, last week or last month, or something bigger, like a hope you have for the future. What are you celebrating? Think about that as you look at your hand. And the last one, the one that was called your pinky, I wonder if you can guess what that one's going to be called. Today we're renaming that last finger action. I'd like you to think about one small action that you would like to take out of today in relation to meaning, purpose and connectedness. It might be a small action, which is why I think it's good that the pinky gets action, because one small action is enough. Might also be a big action. Might be something in your own life, might be something in your work or your organisation. So meaning, purpose, connectedness, celebration and action. Thank you. So we're going to close our formalities now. But just before we do that, I'd like to invite Nick and Sandra and Cynthia and Stephen to come up. Perhaps you could stand near Sandra. As they come up, I'd like to thank the Department of Health again for funding this important first step for the aged care sector. And Elizabeth, you're going to do the honours. So Nick, thank you so much for your words today.
Thank you.
We're greatly encouraged and we'll look forward to the clip going viral as people hear what you had to say about the guidelines. So thank you, Nick. And Sandra, thank you so much for your generosity in having us here and also sharing some of your thoughts. Thank you, Sandra. And Stephen and Cynthia and Tennille and all of the staff here, just a very small token of our thanks for having us today. So thank you. Also, of course, we need to thank NARI, Spiritual Health Victoria, and all of you that have contributed to creating such a solid benchmark for spiritual care in aged care in Australia.